going on, y'all? And welcome to another episode of Expanded Perspectives. I'm your host, Kyle Filson, and I'm in Skeleton Studios solo. I'm in here all by myself. Cam is up north hunting. Actually, he's not hunting. He's filming hunting, and I'll get more to that in a second. But yeah, I'm here solo in the studio by myself. I've done this once before. I think it was this time last year, actually. But if you were listening to the previous episode, the aquatic ape theory, you might have heard us mention that Cam was going out of town. And then I perhaps would be in the studio alone. I thought about perhaps having a guest come on. We even talked about Little Fizzy. But since I'm doing this during the daytime at Skeleton Studios, Little Fizzy is currently in school where he needs to be. So it's just going to be me in here by myself, and y'all will be here with me. So I feel fine. I've done this kind of thing before, and we're going to get into some pretty cool stories. Right now, Cam is currently up north filming in Kansas. They were going to spend a few days in Kansas, and then they were moving over to Colorado. Cam not only hunts, but he films a lot of hunts. And if you want to check out some of his work, you can go over to Rock Slide, which is a channel on YouTube. I think it's ROKSLIDE. And he's got a hunting video over there that he filmed a year ago. He follows a couple guys that are pretty big in the industry when it comes to hunting. I mean, I'm talking about guys that are on the cover of magazines and stuff. And Cam, for whatever reason, he likes to go up there and film that stuff, and they always want him to come along. So pretty cool. I wish I had his talent. I absolutely know nothing about filming. I'm more of a, just straight up photography kind of guy. But anyways, let's get into some creepy stories. Check this out. This is about two young men who were on a cross-country road trip one night, and they were stopped along an Oregon road to sleep because they got tired, and they were awakened by something pushing and moving their car. Could you even imagine that? Back in June of 2000 is when my encounter took place. 1 year out of high school, my buddy and I were driving around the country. We spent the entire month of June driving and camping our way all over the country, all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, making a huge circle all around. Man, I'm jealous. That would be so much fun. Perhaps in the future when my kids are grown, me and my wife and a couple of our cats can buy like an RV, or I'd like to get like an Airstream or something, and I'd like to tour the whole U.S. by vehicle, because there's a lot you miss when you fly, right? Like, I like flying because you get there quicker. Sometimes the journey itself is the adventure. Anyways, halfway through our trip, somewhere in Oregon, I decided to just pull off of the road one night and sleep until morning. No point trying to set up camp in the rain and in the dark on some desolate road. My buddy didn't feel like driving at that point either. We were both very tired. We wanted to maintain safety, so we decided just to sleep on the side of the road. We parked not far off the side of the road. Again, we were in the middle of nowhere in Oregon. No GPS, no cell phones, nothing. Now, we have an atlas with us that my father used to use as a truck driver. That was how we navigated. Anyways, within minutes, we were both passed out for a good couple of hours when the car suddenly started shaking. We both woke up wondering, what in the hell is going on? What is shaking the car? We figured it was probably a big gust of wind since it was such bad weather out. Well, less than 5 minutes later, the whole back end of the car got pushed about 6 feet in one direction. We both spun around and saw nothing out but black out the back window. It was pitch black where we were. I immediately switched the headlights on and started up the car. Still, there was nothing to be seen. Now, at this point, I was fully awake. I remember this next part like it happened 5 minutes ago. As I looked over at my buddy to tell him where we were and that I could see nothing out any of the windows, I suddenly saw something next to his window. It was something huge. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My buddy was looking at me, and I was staring out his window in shock and fear. I couldn't move, and neither could he, because he could tell Whatever I was seeing was directly behind him. I was frozen. He then slowly turned to see what I was looking at. Then at that moment, two giant yellow eyes appeared. They were right next to the car. We were both frozen stiff. It was at that point in the car that it got rocked again, this time side to side. That was enough to snap me out of whatever trance I was in. I slammed the car into drive and I floored it. I remember almost losing control of the car as we hit the wet road. My buddy was shaking so bad. I myself was having a hard time steering. I drove all the way until daybreak without taking my eyes off of the road. After that night, we cut our trip short. We both knew what we saw. From what we can figure, that thing was crouched down, just staring at us, with his eyes and hands still on the top of the car. After it knew we both could see its eyes, it gave the car one last shove just to mess with us. We did not camp another night as we stayed in hotels the next few nights until we got home. Until this day, I do not camp in remote areas. Whatever that thing was, it made it very, very clear that we were not welcome. Wow. Very cool story. Terrifying, yet cool. I think as long as I was inside the car or truck, it would be kind of fun to have a Sasquatch Jack with you, right? Shake the car, terrify you a little. I think I'd be much cooler than in a hammock or in a soft nylon tent. You know, the car, for whatever reason, gives you a little bit of safety. That would be pretty cool. And scary, I'm not going to lie. And I don't blame them one bit for like cutting the trip short and spending the remainder of the trip in hotels or motels. I totally get it. Check this out. I got another one here. It says, I grew up in the farm country of Northern California. We lived outside of our little town in what I've heard is an old infirmary from World War II. There was a Japanese internment camp about 5 miles away. The floor plan made the rumor believable. It had wide open, long upstairs, one room downstairs, and the garage had a stable-type feel to it. This is where I will try to align these pretty strange events. It was in the mid to late 90s, and my stepdad, a Mexican-American, was hiding some illegal immigrants in our barn from immigration. They stayed up there for a week or so until the heat came off. One guy stated that he was a brujo, which is a witch doctor in Spanish. My mom, a Christian, was reluctant, but he was there. Within days, they were talking about spirits and money being buried in the garage. My stepdad and miscellaneous friends of his got together one evening and started digging. I remember thinking that they were crazy, that the brujo used sticks and other household items to try and find the exact spot to dig. They ended up finding 2 coffee cans full of World War II era silver dollars. Now, I remember my mom getting spooked and kicking that brujo out of the property. My stepdad was kind of scared and freaked out by his abilities and didn't want him to go unceremoniously, but he got the boot nonetheless. I remember my parents trying to figure out how to cash in this loot. There was fear that the money had powers to it, and they wanted to find a way to get them appraised. I was in my teens. I definitely don't remember every detail, but was aware enough to think about we found a legitimate treasure. So my mom must have had enough of some unusual enough happenings since the coins had been found, and she decided to take the coins to town to get what she could for them. Along the way, my younger brother, who was holding them, opened the door to fix his seatbelt or something, and the whole jar spilled out of the door. They were only able to recover a few of the coins. My mom wasn't even that upset. She had more of a good riddance type attitude about them. My stepdad, on the other hand, acted like he lost the original copy of the Declaration of Independence. I figure they had to be worth a lot, especially back then. Life went on after that, and there was no more brujo or anything abnormal for a period of time. This was when things started getting weird. My brothers slept downstairs in bunk beds at the bottom of the stairs. I had a room upstairs that overlooked the garage. One day, my youngest brother was scared to his core that he saw a ghost from his bunk bed. We all kind of wrote it off like, yeah, he's making up stuff. And he described this ghost as a tall man in green army fatigues with a glow around him. He swore to never sleep in those bunk beds again, and he never did. Fast forward to some time later, and the brother right below me told an identical story to the youngest brother's story. But this time, it was upstairs, in the middle room. He swore to never sleep upstairs again, and he never did. I can't remember if these were months apart or years, but they slept in the living room for a long, long time. I mean, they were in junior high when this happened to them, and they slept in the living room till the day they moved out of the house. They were scared, and they definitely saw something. They would go upstairs in the day with no problem. They'd go up there and play video games up through the night, but they wouldn't sleep up there. So I left the house in 1998. I ran into some tough times, and I eventually made my way back home in the early 2000s. My sister had the middle room, and she kept it like a typical high school girl would keep a room, clean and smelling good. So they all slept downstairs still. I took over my sister's room. The night I came home, I fell asleep hard. At some point during the night, I awoke to a tall man dressed in army fatigues standing over me. He looked like a character from the TV show MASH. No face, but tall and right there at the head of the bed looking at me. At first I thought it was a dream, so I closed my eyes and tried to fall back asleep. I don't know if I had sleep paralysis or what, but this thing started choking me. I was getting choked out. I opened my eyes enough to see that the ghost was still there, but not on me in a full mount like it felt, but was just there. I started to yell for my mom, but I couldn't utter a noise. I tried to move and flail, but nothing. I was raised in the church, so I started to pray. I said something like, "I rebuke you in the name of God and his son, Jesus Christ." And just like that, it was over. I went downstairs, took a drink of water, and knocked on my mother's door. I asked her, "Mom, did you hear anything?" She says, "No, go back to bed." I went back upstairs and I went back to bed. It never bothered me again, and I moved out a few weeks later when I landed a job. Like I said, I'm more of a skeptic than a believer, but this happened to me and my brothers. Thanks for all you do, the Red Barn Kid. Well, thank you, Red Barn Kid, for sending that in. What an interesting story. A Spanish-Mexican witch doctor is hiding out from immigration in your barn, says he knows that there's a treasure buried in the garage, then your stepdad and his friends actually dig it up and they find it. These rare World War II era silver dollars. But, like, once they dug them up, that's when bizarre things started happening, and the ghost in the army fatigues, you have to guess that that was his coins, right? And somehow, sorry about that, folks, that's my wristwatch again. Always seems to go off when I'm recording, never while I'm not recording. But, right, you have to assume that that was his coins, and he was somehow angry that the guys uncovered him and tried to trade him in. I wonder if your stepdad experienced anything. You didn't mention that, just you and your brothers, because after all, it was your stepdad and his friends that actually uncovered the coins, not you and your brothers. Very, very cool stories. I like those kind of stories. And speaking of cool stories, Cam will be here in spirit because we pre-recorded his segment. And after the break, when we get into the segment, we're going to be talking about some mantis beings. Very strange, praying mantis type looking entities that for whatever reason people have been seeing. So very creepy. Let's take a break. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. Okay, friends, here we go.
Oh, I don't even know. Okay, so this is where it led to, right? Over the Halloween break, I was watching some of the Men in Black series, which, first of all, I'm a big fan. I'm a big Tommy Lee Jones fan. Always have been for quite some time. Lonesome Dove, right, was probably what set me down the path of Tommy Lee. I know he's been in a ton of other movies, and I've seen a ton of other movies, but Woodrow F. Call is just one of my favorite characters that he plays. I like the series, or the story, Lonesome Dove, the book, the television series, the whole thing. So that's what it was. So it drew me. I was like, Tommy Lee Jones, I'm going to watch some Men in Black. And if you remember in the first one, they're fighting a giant cockroach, right? This giant cockroach is trying to get the light of Zartha. Isn't that what it is? And no, that's in the second one. See, I'm already lost. Anyhow, they're trying to get it, and the giant cockroach is leaving the planet. And it makes sense. With all the stuff going on in the UFO world right now, with what's off our coast, and then the idea of insects in space, something just like that makes sense to me more than anything else. Like maybe the insects works for the gray, I don't know. But what I'm doing is I'm leading us down the path to talk more about the Mantis men. Why is there so much old stuff? When I say old stuff, I'm talking 12,000-year-old cave paintings in Africa that show what look to be mantises or mantis people. And not just that, but that is in their history. And it's not just there either, folks. It's all over. We get tales from rock art down in South Africa all the way across, like we have it everywhere, of these stories of mantis people, of the ant people also we have here in North America, that they saved us, right? That in the time of a cataclysm that they came up and got us and let us down. A lot of Native American folklore talk about them leading us into like an underground haven, right? And that's where we live. That's where we survived. We came back out. The ant people had always been here. They have always been here, and they're still here. And something about that seems true. It seems to feel like, well, have they been on this planet? Is this, because what would we know, right? Like we haven't seen them. Maybe they're not there. Maybe they are. Who knows, right? Like we've always talked about if it's one-off stuff. Now, you would think that we could find some underground caverns and that we would, be able to locate them. But maybe that's not how this works. Maybe they are in the deepest depths of what cavernous system we have in North America, or wherever you're listening to this from. If there's mantises in your area, maybe that's what it's from. But we have mantis sightings here all over. We have them, like I've talked about. I think one of the most famous ones was from New Jersey, right? The river there, I always mess it up. What's it? The Musconetong, right? Musconetong, is that it? I don't even know how to pronounce that crazy stinking river. But anyway, that was a place of a very famous sighting of a praying mantis man, right? They still go on. That's what's crazy, is it's not like we talked about in the past with Nordic sightings. You remember, my glasses are all messed up from my headphones. Anyway, the Nordics it's almost like they just quit showing up, right? After about 75, they said, pack your things, we're leaving. And they left, and we don't see much of it. And there's several. What about the silver? Like we've talked about, will look like the silver men, where they look like they're almost like, what is it, the daytime stood still or whatever it is, where it looks like the robot comes off the air, the UFO. We still get, or we used to get sightings of those, and people would talk about it, but we don't seem to get as many. There may be a few strays from here and there, but it's almost like they went home, if that's a thing, or they just kind of quit, or maybe they were forced out. Maybe the Greys is what forced them off of this planet. Maybe it truly is like one of my favorite shows, Resident Alien, where the Greys are kind of in charge of stuff, but who knows? What I wanted to talk to you about was more of these mantis being sightings. Now, like I said, we get all this wild stuff of these sightings of different, alien species, but this is one of those ones, for me, the idea of an insect in space makes sense. But the other thing, too, is you could kind of see how you can misidentify things. As we've covered for all the years on this show, you could misidentify an upright bear let's say, not every time, of course, not every sighting. We're not talking about that. We're not broad brushing. But what we're saying is you could misidentify a bear walking on two legs as something maybe cryptid, right? You could easily do that. You could misidentify lots of things that you heard or saw the outline, or maybe have found tracks, or think you found bedding areas of things. There's lots of things that you could misconstrue. I've done it. We've all done it at certain times, right? Assumptions. Y'all all know the thing about assumptions, right? But what can you misidentify in nature that we have at this very moment out here that's a mantis man? I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything because we don't have anything on this planet that's insectoid that's that size that we could misidentify. All the insects we have are small. What's the biggest one we're talking about? Maybe as big, like a big praying mantis, the size of your hand, like the length 6 inches, maybe, you think? I've not looked that up, but you're going off. Most of them are about 3 or 4 inches. Maybe they have some big ones. They got the sticks, all of this. If you've seen the stick figures hiding in trees, then you could easily see how if there were mantis beings in, let's say, the woods, first of all, we don't know what tracks they're going to leave, right? They're probably not going to leave many. They got small insectoid feet. And also we don't know what to look for. And they blend in. So we know that they're all around in the insect world. How come that couldn't be in the same height, or in the same size, rather? So this is what I'm going to tell you. I've got a few crazy sightings of one, and one comes from Maya. And Maya says that, that she has seen a mantis being. Her and her boyfriend actually saw one in an apartment complex where they were living. Now, she doesn't say where the apartment complex was, but she went on to say that what she and her boyfriend saw looked to be a blend between half man and half mantis. And it also looked to be a hologram. Now, one thing that she points out, aside from the hologram, was that she said it looked sad. Now, how you can tell it looks sad, I don't know, on a bug. I have no idea a bug's facial features. I don't know if they even move like that. But mantis men apparently can look sad and tired, because she says that they both saw it, and it was crawling up the building. Now, if y'all remember, I think I may have talked about this a long time ago, where somebody had seen something along the lines of this black creature, almost like a shadow being, crawling up the outside of a building. Well, now this was a mantis being. And of course they didn't have their phone. Apparently her and her boyfriend were out taking a walk, didn't bring their phones, just strolling along. But when they saw this, they kind of freaked out, scooted back to their place. Another one, Max posted, talks about that he doesn't know if they saw a praying mantis alien, or if it was, exactly like they said here, what this thing was, but it was a bug person, or what he calls bug people. He says that I don't know if they're grays or praying mantises or even what they are, but these things are very insect-like. And what I saw was this. It says this, usually a very bright white, like milk or plastic. It's has very smooth skin, 5 to 7 foot tall with huge black eyes. That says that for this one instance that he saw it, couldn't tell if it was a bug lady or a humanoid in a spacesuit. Now, that's a really interesting concept, that maybe it's the spacesuit itself on this one. But Max goes on to say that what he felt, and I like this, what he felt was this was female energy. So it's projecting this energy to them. But it usually feels, and goes on to this energy is very oppressive, very emotionless, and very scary. And I'm like, yeah, no joke. Even goes in to talk about one of the times that Max believes he was abducted by these mantis people, and remembers being like on a medical table, paralyzed while being surrounded by a group of mantis beings. So we don't know if it's grays turning themselves to look like that, or if it's mantises looking like grays, or if this is a whole group of others, or they're subcontractors. We have no idea. But again, there's that feeling. And also I like the 5 to 7 foot tall in height. Something about 7 foot seems to be the magic number for humanoids, for mantises, for Sasquatch, any of these things. 7 foot's the magic number, right? Well, Mike posts up, says, I've woken up several times to see a large black 7 or 8 foot tall mantis standing at the foot of the bed watching me. Now, after these several visits over the several years, I've always chalked them up to hypnagogic hallucinations until this last one. It says a recent visit had naked people, little naked people in their room that looked like gray aliens. All right. And that in the moving of these gray aliens while they were in the room, small, naked little grays, one of the large mantises was with them, milling around the whole thing in the room. Now, I'm saying this, bro, move, right? I'm saying move, do whatever you got to do. Don't hang out in there with these creatures like this. But it is weird that Saw 2 instantly recognizes the grays. What's the mantises? Are the mantises helping? Whatever it is. Now, here's a very, very interesting one. Now, this one was from someone. This is an anonymous posting. It says, I woke up several times throughout the night talking about taking DMT, right? So they started doing a little DMT fun with some friends, was kind of waking up in and out of the haze, and all of a sudden, a mantis comes to them. And the mantis came to this person and claims that helped get this person out of their bad trip, helped walk this person down, settle them down, and get them out of it. And this is what it says here. It says it was like being under a bright light when this large mantis being appeared. And I felt like it was talking about like he felt like being laid on a table. So again, was it an abduction or was this still just the DMT talking? The person says that their eyes were open and that they tried to always keep them closed, right? The whole trip, just like, just being into it. Nope. The eyes were open. They couldn't move, all of this stuff. They could feel everything, but could not move, was just froze, and said that the mantis being could tell that this person was struggling and reached down and boop, touched him on the forehead. It was all over. Woke back up, back in their dimension, back in their room, wherever they're at, wherever it was going down, boom, right back in there. Like the mantis saw them, checked them out, like maybe have laid them on the table, did a medicine check and said, hey, look, you're good, boop, and you're ready to rip, right? So I got to looking around here, trying to figure out if we could find some that were, maybe a little bit older, maybe around the time of the peak mantis sightings, maybe around the peak, some really good UFO sightings. And I found one again in Jersey, right near Medford, New Jersey, back in 1962. One evening, it says that the pregnant witness on her way to see her doctor was on a well-traveled road when she happened to look up into the sky and she saw a huge purple moon-like object. And I like the idea of that, right? Purple moon, purple rain, baby. So she pulls over, like, wait a minute, what's going on? Says the object then seemed to fade out and become another color. It turned from purple to blue, green, orange, and then silver. And it just kept spinning and fading out. Says the next thing she remembers, she's at her doctor's office an hour and a half later, and her face had acquired a sunburn. Yeah. Now, years later, she decided to take hypnosis, and she was able to remember mostly of what happened. And her story says that she was taken inside this craft by what looked like a large eye that opened up under the craft. So maybe like, is it glass? Is it a door? Whatever it is. But she was brought inside a small white room, pushed against a wall by something resembling a praying mantis. And behind her is a medical metallic slab table. She says they were two short, white, pale creatures with large black eyes that, of course, took care of her, said, hey, look, you're not going to be harmed. They were talking to her telepathically. They brought her like a change of clothes. They helped dress her, this whole thing. Says then a reptilian-like creature enters the room. She was led through the craft where she went back through a black room, and she felt like she was not in a comfortable place, right? Then she went, and these rooms kept changing. Boom, boom, different colors, a gold room, a black room, the white room. They're going to these different spots. She wanted to go, but they said, hey, look, you're not ready. Says the next room they took her to, and it may have been the last one here, but says it was a small pink, pale in color, tiny room that had 20 incubators, 10 on top, 10 on bottom. She said it also appeared to her to have petri dishes with embryos in it. And in there, she saw what looked like, like a crossbreeding of human and mantis. Yeah, the difference was the color of the eyes. Instead of being jet black, they're aqua colored, but they were still large on a large head, and the eyes were angled. So instead of being flat, they're angled up like a slant. As it going, I'm just thinking maybe that's mad mantis, right? Says it had very sparse hair and could tell that it was a hybrid baby, almost like they were growing tadpoles. She goes into this whole story about being more of the abducted, going through finding different rooms as they led her from room to room. Some had different even environments in each room. Some were misty on this ship. Some were warm, like each room was being, and I guess for the lack of better terms, climate controlled for whatever they were raising or growing or anything in there. Here's something that's really interesting, though. She was led out of the room in front of what she says was two little short creatures into another room where there were 7 beings all wearing cloaks. She says now one alien, one was tall, one, of course, looked somewhat human, and then the other one, which appeared to be the leader, was Nordic. Here we go again, but this is 62, a Nordic humanoid. She goes on that as she got closer to the Nordic humanoid, it appeared to be a hologram, much like, again, the very first mantis being that we saw maybe climbing the building, a hologram, a projection. Now, it's either that's what they're projecting, and of course, why would you project a hologram to do something physical? Or maybe that is just truly what they look like in our plane of existence. I have no idea, right? Like the whole thing. But story goes on that she'd received some knowledge from these things and talked about it and all this stuff, but she didn't know all this till years later. So it's kind of like you forgot to mail the letter, right? You got all this information, but you didn't know till years later. No telling what you could have done with it. But now you jump back forward, 1967, Catalina Island, California. A person named Paul was visiting the island there with his parents. He's 12 years old at the time. Paul had his best friend with him, Michael. And he and old Michael are hanging out. They go inside the boat. They're checking out comic books. They're just living their best life. And they experience a little missing time. And then their next memory, which if you experience missing time, that's always a little wanky, right? Like, oh, what's going on? Their next memory was waking up the next morning. Now, Paul, of course, is trying to tell his parents that something strange has happened. And then Michael starts chiming in, and both of them are like, look, they're just pulling their leg, right? They're just kids, 12-year-old boys having a good time. It says about 2 weeks later, Paul's back at his home in Reseda, there in California, and he had something else strange. He said he's just hanging out when the doorknob rattles on his bedroom door, and then, so he jumps up, grabs it, opens it up. To his amazement, he said he saw a shadow of a small figure running down the hallway. So he chases it. He didn't find anything as he goes on. He's like, man, I didn't find anything going on there. It just ran out. I didn't know what it was, right? So many years later, Paul, but he's a doctor at this point. He's married and all this stuff. So he decides, you know what? After talking to people and his wife and people in the biz around him, he says, I'm going to go just for fun down to recalling it and mess with my brain. No, I'm just joking, but it is that. He decides to go do a regression. So he's like, I got to go see what's going on. I'm going to put some validity into this and see what's going on. And at first, surprised that he was not on board a UFO, but instead, in his regression, it appears that he was taken to an underground base. Says he was taken to a round-walled room, and it seemed like it was more of an underground facility than on a ship. Says the walls were rock-like facet of them, and that he was lying on a rock table and was given the impression that he was in a cavern rather than a ship. And under hypnosis, Paul recalled that his friend Michael was nearby, was also being examined. And, of course, surprisingly, they were beings that were not what he expected. He said they weren't the typical grays, y'all. He said they were more like the praying mantis type, that they were bigger than the grays and a lot more insectoid than them. But here's the weird thing, folks. They wore uniforms, tight-fitting uniforms. Now, he says that there's even a color to them, but he couldn't tell what color these uniforms were, but that they looked like jumpsuits. He thinks that there was one in the group that wore a tunic-like outfit, but that was more loosely fitting, but he couldn't really remember that tiny detail of it. But He did go on to say this, of course, laying down as a child, he didn't know their size, but he said that to him, they didn't seem particularly tall like some of the other reports. But this isn't where it stops. Here's one that took place in the Sequoia National Forest in San Diego, California. It says by a fellow named Ricky, says, I just want to share an experience. This happened a few years back in Sequoia National Forest. My sister took my friend and I out there, and we were deep, deep in the forest trying to get away from civilization and just having a great time. Now, I am a believer in the paranormal, in aliens, and in Bigfoot, all that stuff. But while I was there, that had never crossed my mind. I was just camping with the family and just having a great time, living in the moment. And around 9 o'clock, everyone says, hey, look, it's time. Let's go to bed. So my friend and I were just staring at the bonfire, which is probably, I'm thinking, that's always like the woodland TV, right? That's Mother Nature's television, get your little fire going. So I decided it was a good time to pop on some music. So I went to my sister's 4Runner and was going through my backpack there and in the back trying to get my iPod out. Says, as I opened the back door, I heard something come out of a tree. Now, it didn't just come out of the tree. It was almost like it was holding on and it fell. Or I'm thinking maybe it dropped, right? And I heard this huge thump and I could feel this thump. And I had a flashlight on me. So I looked over at the tree I heard this falling sound from, and I swear on my life, all honesty, I saw a 6 to 7 foot tall praying mantis. And as I laid eyes on it, I completely lost my breath, my mind, everything. I was blown away. I took one step back and it became completely invisible. I could not believe what I had saw. So I slammed the door and I ran back to the little campfire. I told my friend, I woke everyone up, and no one would believe me. Now, I was very upset because I knew I had seen that. So that happened to my friend and mine, and he didn't believe, and so they're all laughing at me, and all of a sudden I could hear these things surrounding us, and so finally I brought it to my friend's attention. He kind of put his ear out and was like, hey, I think I hear something too. Finally, patrolling the campground with my flashlight, I could just hear these things surrounding us, making clicking sounds. It was very strange, and I was very scared. Now, that's where the story ends. That's it. Talks about hearing it, never seeing it again, feeling surrounded by it. Makes me wonder, are the Mantis beings the one involved in maybe Glimmerman sightings? Maybe that's the Mantis people. They don't ever talk about seeing the Glimmerman face. Maybe we're thinking of it as Sasquatch or something, but maybe it's the Mantis beings in these uniforms or whatever, like this person here that Ricky talked about seeing is some kind of crazy mantis. But it doesn't stop there again. We have one from Harwood Heights, Illinois, that talks about a winged humanoid that might be something that we could roll into. Maybe the mantises are involved in this. It says, I was coming back from work in 2014 at about 1:30 in the morning. I pulled up the driveway and something caught the side of my eye. So I walked up the stairs and went to the window because I live on the second floor. I looked out of the window to across the street and saw a small, crypto, if you will, Mothman type insectoid. Usually or unusually large head, no red eyes, and it was just staring like a small mantis man, I guess. It says, I went to make some tea. I fed the cats. I came back. I rubbed my eyes to see if I was tired and seeing things. And sure enough, it was still there. Now, one important thing, there was no foreboding fear. I never had a feeling of it pressing on me or anything evil. It was just there. And I found it interesting. I was shocked, as many people have seen several things, or this similar thing. So I went several times to the window, I would say 4 or 5 times, just to look outside to see if it was still there. And it was. Now, I live in a small town near Chicago, so I figured police would do their rounds or someone would see it. The difference is that you could hear a pin drop. This thing was silent outside. Everything was silent. Now, I live in a small community, so there was no one around. So, I didn't think anybody'd really be out there kicking around. Now, I did have a smartphone at the time, but overall, no fear, no nothing. Nothing even, spurred me to take a picture. I was just staring because you can't truly believe what you're seeing. Now, you listen to these accounts, it says here, and you never really know the situation. You never know how that person's feeling, but I can tell you this. It's confusion. It is the uttermost amount of confusion. And I went back to the window several times, and I would just keep peering out every now and again to see if it was there, and it was. So finally, I drifted off to sleep, and in the morning, jumped out of bed, and I went out and looked out the window again, and it was gone. Not only was it gone, there was no trace of anything had ever been out there. So, above all, I would say the strangest thing would be that I was not afraid at all. I was just confused and so intrigued, and I'm still shocked by that feeling now. And it's been several months and years since we've talked about all this stuff with my friends, and they have an interest in it. And I keep telling them that I've seen it, and they keep making jokes about it, saying, oh, it was just a dog. Oh, it was just something that you thought you saw, but it wasn't. It was almost definitely as if the body was much smaller than the head. Almost as if, you know, the old cartoons from Spy versus Spy from the Mad magazine? It looked something along like that. It says it had a nose that came to a point like a bird's beak, had a protruding face. There were no eyes or no facial features, but again, in that humanoid design, that's where the face would be. It says the head was much larger than the body. And I guess by seeing the small body and large head, as odd as it was, I wasn't going to go outside and even look outside. So I felt safe just peeking out the window, hoping it didn't see me. So this person goes on to explain, or describe rather, an odd take on what they saw. Maybe it was a blend, maybe it was a mantis, maybe it wasn't a mantis. I don't know. It's a very odd twist to it, but small. Could it be the humanoids that we report seeing around O'Hare Airport, around Chicago? Is this one of the same, or is it because there's an array? So many strange things that happen. Now, here's another one from Riverside, California. Took place in 1988. Anthony reports this, and this is something I'm going to leave you with because I really enjoy this. It says, I was just moving out of the house for the first time. I moved to Crestline with a couple of friends. This story involves my buddy Nate and myself. He was helping me move into my room, and by then, we moved most of my things, and it was the end of the night, probably around 10 o'clock. My room was facing the back of the slope of a hill, and right above the hill was another house, and there's no fences, so neighbors and the kids I noticed throughout the day were playing and just going through the yard, you know, like normal, no big deal. When my buddy and I were in the room, we looked out the window and we saw a couple kids. And it was pretty late at the time and very dark. The kids were just playing around, having a good time. I go and get another beer for Nate and I, and when I come back, he says the kids went away. And there was just one girl left, and it's kind of weird. We're looking, trying to see if she's okay, because she's just standing there, just kind of facing east. When she started moving slowly, and I noticed it. I don't know if it was the moonlight or what, but her skin started becoming more pale. Yeah, it was really weird. Now, she's dressed in normal clothes. Just at the time, she started to put her head up and start looking around. Now, we didn't say anything because we were already a little freaked out, but then when she looked up at us, her eyes were all black. Then maybe a couple seconds later, it was almost a reddish black. Really weird. Now, that's right there. It freaked us out. And we just slammed the window shut, put the blinds over it, done. And as we peeked through the window just to see what was there, it was almost like it was I don't want to say skinwalker, but it was almost like a creature or something out of the Men in Black movie. It was all quiet, but it wasn't a girl anymore. It was almost like a man-like body, but the arms and the legs were almost double jointed. And it was walking in almost crab-like. It was very weird, you know. At that point, it was just screaming like crazy. So we ran down the stairs and was trying to contemplate whether we should just get in the car. Yeah, this thing started screaming, y'all. We stayed inside for about an hour. My buddy Nate and I were having anxiety through the roof. And at one point, Nate decided to, let's do it. Let's just get out of here. We ran down across the deck, of course, down to get to our car. And luckily the car was an automatic, you know, the button where you can just turn it on. Well, when we're backing up, you have to go slow on the very tip where it gets on the main street of the driveway. Or of course, you'll drag the back of the car. But at that point, we were going too fast. We went backwards too fast, hit the bottom of the tow hitch, and it was so fast that the truck went back on it. And the front end came up, and we were vertical, basically, for maybe 30 seconds, freaking out. At that point, I was able to use my body weight to push the car forward, and it went down forward. I can't even imagine this, can y'all? We looked down, and there was the creature right in front of us. We were just cold. It was human, and it almost had a man's body, but no hair. And it was just a pale creature, but more like an insect. Arms and legs were both disjointed. It was the craziest thing. It was exactly what a praying mantis would look like. What do y'all grab about that? So they wrecked their car trying to get away from this thing. So they may have seen a little girl transform from a black-eyed kid into a pale mantis being. Is that the trick, folks? Is that what we're not seeing? Is that what the black-eyed kids are? Or the reason they're black-eyed are because they're insects? They're the mantis people. That's where the black eyes come from. They're not demonic. The reason they act that way is they don't know our ways. And they're trying to get in the house. They're trying to do whatever. And is this what broke it? Is this what it is? Did these people catch the black-eyed kid interacting with regular kids? The regular kids get freaked out and leave, and now it converts and transforms back into the mantis. I don't know. I don't know that we'll ever know, but I do know this. I know I'm out of time. I love the stories of the mantis people. I really appreciate y'all sticking around. Let's take a quick break. When we get back, we'll wrap this baby up. We'll see if we can't scare Philly with some more mantis stories. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives.
And we're back with Expanded Perspectives. Hope you guys enjoyed the stories of mantis beings. Thank you very much, Mr. Cam Hale, for not only enlightening us, but terrifying us at the same time. Yep, I do not know, what people are describing with these mantis beings. It is kind of creepy. Praying mantises are creepy themselves. I mean, for such a tiny bug, those things are pretty strong. Like, I've seen videos of them killing hummingbirds, things that outweigh them, by 10, 20 times. Could you imagine if those things were like the size of the bugs, like on Starship Troopers? That would be what we'd be dead, right? Very, very cool. A funny story. So, of course, my wife, she does all kinds of crazy things. And one of the things she did when Luke was much younger was she ordered these pods. I don't know what else to call it. It's like an egg sack, and inside are baby praying mantises, right? So you order this thing on Amazon, you put it in your house. You got to keep it between like 70 and 80 degrees or something like that. And in 2 or 3 months, they'll hatch. And she bought like a little cage, like a terrarium, but it's not really a terrarium. It's like a mesh. So it's breathable. There's no terrain or anything. But so if the egg thing hatches, they don't just get out. Well, Luke being like 4 years old, these things hatched, and he opened it up and spilt it all over the couch. So literally in my house, there were probably, without exaggeration, 3,000 praying mantis loose. But the cool thing was how tiny they were. I mean, I would say half the size of a grain of rice. That's how tiny they were. I had no idea. So we scooped up as many as we could, and we put them on a lot of her plants. My wife is really into gardening and plants. Our whole porch is covered in plants. Our whole house is covered in plants. She has a greenhouse that's filled with plants. And you put the praying mantises on the plants, and, they get rid of bugs and stuff. So very cool. If you want to do something like that, I'm sure you can go on Amazon and find these praying mantis sacks. Just make sure you keep them out of the reach of children. I got a pretty cool story here. Check this out. My story began about 14 years ago when I was out deer hunting in the South Fork of the Shoshone River just outside Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. Just before the sun went down, my buddy flushed a huge buck entirely by accident. As we were walking back to the truck, he shot it and saw the thing run off. Now, he knew he'd gotten a good solid hit on it, so We went over to where he shot it and found obvious signs of blood everywhere. So we stayed there a few minutes, smoked a couple of cigarettes to hopefully let the deer stop and lay down and bleed out. Now, for you folks out there that aren't deer hunters, this is very common. When you shoot a deer, you're not supposed to go looking for it. You're supposed to let it have some time, like 30 minutes, even an hour. Because just like with humans, if the deer isn't hit really good, you can spook it and then its adrenaline will start pumping and the thing will even run farther. And you'll chase the thing for miles the whole time with the adrenaline pumping, makes the meat taste really lousy. So the best thing is to just leave them be. They'll fall down, go to sleep. After securing permission from the landowner, we were able to cross onto his property. That's where we found the deer. Now we field dressed the deer and drug it out and loaded it in the truck. Just before we were getting ready to leave, I realized that I left my gloves on the ground back where we field dressed the deer. So I told my buddy to hang on for a minute and I'll run back and grab my gloves. As I stood up, literally every hair on my body stood up, like a static electricity kind of feeling. I slowly turned and scanned everything around me to see if I was maybe just picking up the feeling that there was a bear or something nearby. I quickly started moving back towards the truck. I got near the truck and started relaxing, but I was still feeling really uneasy. And the thought in my head was just to get out of there. My buddy looked at me and asked, "What's wrong?" Because I guess it was written all over my face. I told him that I had a weird feeling. I thought maybe that there might be a bear in the vicinity because we had seen lots of signs earlier that day. He looked at me strangely and then said, "What did the landlord have to say?" I looked at him puzzled because I had no idea what he was talking about. You know, we talked to the landowner after shooting the deer to secure permission to cross into his woodlot, but that was at his house, out close to the highway. So I asked him, "What are you talking about?" He said that he saw who he thought was the landowner coming from where his house was, walking through the woods to where I was retrieving my gloves. I saw him kind of disappear back farther into the woods where I should have been. I was completely confused at this point because I hadn't seen anybody. I didn't hear anybody either. There was enough leaves and such on the ground that it would be very difficult for someone to quietly walk up to me without me hearing them. I just kind of shook it off at that point, thinking I let my imagination get the best of me. We proceeded to leave. We had to stop back at the landowner's house to give him his portion of the state tag so that he could get reimbursed. My buddy went up to the door to leave his tag, and the owner greeted him at the door. I got out of the truck at that point, walked up there, and they were already in mid-conversation. I realized it wasn't the landowner that my friend saw going through the woods. So we got a short discussion with the landowner, and I told him what had happened. He looked at me and chuckled a bit and said, "Oh, I see you met my friend." I asked him, "What are you talking about?" No, not a friend, but a friend that he sees in the woods every once in a while. That's what he told me. Now, at that point, my buddy and I realized what the heck this guy was talking about. Later that night, I was at my buddy's house before heading back home. We were talking about this encounter, and his wife was the first one to bring it up and say the word out loud. "You guys saw Bigfoot?" For some reason, when she actually said it out loud, I just felt this overwhelming feeling of terror. I went home, and a few days later, I wanted to go hunting again in the same area, and when I got down there was this overwhelming feeling like I did the previous time, and I started to tell myself I ain't going in there by myself. I had to listen to that sixth sense, and I got right back in my truck, and I drove home. I'll be honest with you, I haven't set foot in those woods till this day. I don't blame you, right? So his buddy watches his friend go retrieve his gloves, and he thought he saw the landowner walking over to him, and it wasn't the landowner. It was a Sasquatch. I don't know how I'd feel. Like I said earlier in the show, I wouldn't mind sitting in my car and having it shake the car, having an experience like that, but just walking along alone in the dark to get my gloves and something's walking with me, I don't know. And I'm not going to lie, every single morning I walk into the woods when I go hunting, or every time in the evening when I'll walk out, I think about stories like this. I was just hunting a couple days ago, and it was a full moon. It was so bright out once it was dark that I didn't even need my headlamp or flashlight to walk out of the woods. I just bebopped out of there by myself. We recently got a pretty interesting phone call from somebody who has what can only be categorized as missing time. Check this out.
What's up, Brad? This one has had me kind of thrown for a loop for a while, guys. Honestly, it's been kind of hard for me to revisit this one because I just don't know what happened. But basically, I'm from Georgia. I got to trucking, and I was going to take a little vacation/work trip down to Jacksonville area, more specifically Ferdinand Beach. And I was going to stay at a friend of mine's house that he rents out. And I was going to, while I was down there, look for a couple vehicles I'd been looking at in hopes of purchasing one to bring back to Georgia. That all aside, I get there, I'd say maybe around 3, 4. I enjoy some scenery, do some hiking. It's kind of out of the way of everything. It was a very nice place to be, and I was having a good time. I just had my new puppy with me, a Labrador Retriever. And like I said, I was geared in for the night, so I went and took a shower. And at that point, I don't remember anything else. I wake up kind of back into consciousness, come to find out over 100 miles away. I have no idea of what time frame this happened in. All I know is I'm outside of this guy's house in a cul-de-sac of a neighborhood I'm not familiar with. I'm extremely disoriented. I knock on his door. He comes to the door, and eventually, I remember saying to the guy, "Is this David's house?" Which is a friend of mine, but in my right mind would never have been a question I would have asked. I obviously knew it was not. The guy eventually pulls out a gun and tells me to get the hell off his property, which I was in my right mind enough to do. I skate down the road a little bit, try to find my way out of the neighborhood. Like I say, I have nothing on me, nothing in my pockets. I have one sock on, no shoes, a pair of shorts on, no shirt. I'm bewildered at this point, guys. I'm trying to collect myself. So I go and I walk to the front of the neighborhood. I look around, and it was, a basic Florida road, which is, long, without light, and creepy. So I have no recourse of action except for to choose to go to the right, and I walked. Guys, I don't know how long I walked, but it was enough that my feet were cut up and bloody by the time I finally came across to a fire station. I go and I knock on the door of the fire station. This must have been hours. Within that time, maybe a car or two passed me, but of course, like I said, I was half nude and they weren't stopping for me. So I get to the fire station, and the guys also looked at me like I was crazy, and they told me they could have the police out there, and then they would figure it out. Well, I was not in the mood for that, and I kept on walking. I walked down a little bit further, I'd say maybe a mile or two further down the road, and I finally got to like a little area. There was a Publix on the left-hand side over there, or some sort of grocery store, and there was a guy who stopped. And the first thing he asked me was, "What's going on?" I started to tell him kind of what's going on with me, and he's sympathetic. He's listening to me. Not 2 seconds later, a police officer pulls up. And from that point on, it was, I don't know what. I've heard Jacksonville has a sour reputation. But, yeah, he didn't take long to draw his gun on me and quickly, detained me, cuffed me, put me in the back of the car to try to figure out what was going on. I did explain myself to him. I explained myself at the hospital they took me to. I was checked out, said I was fine, everything was good, released the next day. I get back to the city of Ferdinand Beach, where I come to find out was over 100 miles away from where I had been picked up at. I find my car in the parking lot of a Home Depot. It was parked within 2 or 3 different spots, kind of crookedly parked, maybe, hurriedly parked. All my belongings, cell phone, everything were just scattered about in the car. This is highly unlike me. Like I said, I don't know really how the car got there, how I got where I was at. My dog was okay. He was back at the vacation home, and thank goodness for that, of course. But like I said, guys, I've spent about a year and a half thinking on this one, scratching my head and talking to my friends and everybody and anyone who will listen. And I myself cannot come up with any logical reason why I come to my consciousness over 100 miles away from where I was at without any cell phone, barely any clothes, no cigarettes in my pocket, these things are just uncharacteristic of myself, and I don't see me being in my right consciousness ever doing something of that nature. So I've been kind of worried about what happened, obviously, but what can you do, fellas? I just scratch my head and move on. And I don't know, maybe you guys can make some sense of this. I love the podcast, love what you do, guys. Been listening for as long as you've been doing it, and I look forward to it every week. So I appreciate it, guys. If you come up with something, don't scare me too bad, all right? Thanks, guys.
Wow. What a strange story. And I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, without knowing the person. Was it an abduction by like people? I mean, like, was he drugged? He said that he was, he didn't have a cell phone with him. He didn't have his cigarettes with him. He wound up 100 miles away. This is not something he would have done on his own. Was it alien abduction? I don't know. Was it like some sort of stroke or an epileptic fit or something, and he blanked out? I don't know. The person, without knowing the background, there's a lot of possible scenarios. But no matter what the scenario, very disturbing, very, very scary. I can't imagine winding up 100 miles away from where I was with like one sock on, no cell phone, no nothing. I mean, you'd have to be wondering, as they mentioned, what in the world happened to them. Thank you for sending that in, though. If you have a story you'd like to share with me and Cam and the audience, you can call in just like that listener, 888-393-2783. You can also email the show, expandedperspectives@yahoo.com. And you can share with us whatever you want, a story of your own, an article, a link, anything like that helps the show out. Before we get out of here, let's thank our wonderful sponsors. Don't forget to check out the podcast True Crime Couple. You can find them anywhere you find podcasts. Also, don't forget about Manscaped, right? It's a perfect gift for the holidays coming up. Right now, you can get 20% off and free shipping with the code EXPANDED at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Be sure to use the code EXPANDED. And also, don't forget about Blinkist. Right now, Blinkist has a special offer for you. Just go to Blinkist.com/expanded to start your 7-day free trial and get 20% off a Blinkist premium membership. And with a premium membership, you get Blinkist Connect. You get basically 2 premium subscriptions for the price of 1. I hope everybody had a good time on this episode. I know I did. Hope you enjoyed the stories. Hopefully the next episode, Cam will be back in town. It's not a guarantee. Until then, I hope everybody out there has a good week. Till next time, folks, I'm Kyle. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. Peace.